Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Engineers podcast. Today I'm joined by Plum, who's a Senior Director of Engineering at a company called Row. Row are doing some awesome things around building accessibility in the telehealth space. We're also going to be talking about digital accessibility today. And Plum's really opened my eyes up to this over the last couple of weeks of us two talking and where the idea of digital accessibility really comes from, how you can introduce that into your teams, and the impact that it actually has. So I'm pretty looking forward to today and exploring this subject a little bit more. It's quite a new subject for me as well. Plum, say hello, do an intro for us, and give us a bit of background on
Yeah,
you.
yeah, sure. So, howdy, I'm Plum. You said Senior Director of Engineering, so we covered that piece. I've been in the tech industry for well over a decade at this point. I started in completely non tech at all. I did a lot of graphic design and video, and I studied economics in college, and then kind of accidentally ended up being an engineer, and then accidentally ended up being an engineering manager. It was a little more intentional in that,
Yeah,
and progressed from
yeah.
there. So, outside of work, I'm a baker. I really like baking things. And one theme in sort of all of my different parts of my career is this idea of both like creating things and then sharing things with others. I really care about helping others, and that manifests in very different ways throughout my career. And that is one of the big reasons why accessibility became something that when I was very early in my career in the engineering space, I really latched onto. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Accessibility was something that I could hear from you loud and
Mhm.
clear, whether it's the mission of the business, Row in this case, which it'd be good to give some credit to Row and what
Oh,
they're
yeah.
building, but also digital accessibility. I hear that loud and clear from you and what we can do, which is obviously subject to today. Should we give an overarching view on who Row are, what are they building, what have they introduced to the
Yeah,
market?
absolutely. So Ro's been around for 6, almost 7 years at this point. I've been at Ro for
Yeah.
3.5, so pretty much just a little over half the lifespan of Ro. Ro is a direct-to-patient telehealth company based out of New York, and it's focused on goal-oriented healthcare. So someone doesn't come to us and say, like, I want this medication. They say, I want to lose weight. I want to have better sex. I want better skin. And we really help them tackle that goal. And that's through a couple of different things. That's through telemedicine, consult with clinicians, that's through medication in our pharmacy, that's through at home testing, labs, and diagnostics. And we provide all of that. We provide that to folks, and it's all coming, from their homes so that they are able to really get access to that healthcare. And that's where the whole goal of access comes in. And I can keep going if you want to hear a little more about access and accessibility in the healthcare space, because it's a very important topic for telehealth.
I'd love to hear that because I'm pretty sure that it's going to segue quite nicely into our digital accessibility point. And there's some pretty shocking
Yeah,
facts that you
yeah,
top and
yeah,
off
yeah.
come
I've
around.
got lots, and I wrote down numbers, so I made sure to remember the numbers.
Love
But
it.
so if you think about the pandemic, so 2020, a lot of things changed. It was a big pivot point in a lot of ways in technology, and then included in healthcare technology. The idea of telehealth itself isn't new. The actual concept of telehealth, I think you can go back literally to like pre 1900s when we're thinking about the first ideas of someone not having to go to the doctor but having a phone call, or the idea of a doctor being able to diagnose something over radio. And then you get to the 1950s and 60s and we start to have the first closed circuit television used for healthcare. So this is not new, but it was something that necessarily wasn't as comfortable for all folks or as familiar to folks until 2020, when suddenly the idea of going to a physical doctor's office, seeing people in person, has a whole different sort of cost benefit calculation than it may have had in years past. So Roe wasn't doing anything new. And it's not like the second that everyone sort of moved to an online space that all of a sudden folks were, everyone was coming to Roe, because there was still an element of comfortability with telemedicine. I pulled a stat from Pew Research, who does a lot of research into internet usage. And in 2021, so a year and a half into the pandemic, 40% of Americans reported that they were using the internet in a new way. So that means that literally almost half of the country in a year and a half was suddenly accessing all of these different tools and technologies in a very different way than they had in the past. And so there's a huge learning curve there. And there's two sides of it. There's folks coming to new places, having to build their own new skills in working in a digital environment. And then on the provider side, on engineers building websites, providing services, whether it's healthcare or groceries or anything like that, making sure those technologies work for folks. It's a huge translation process and a big sort of mental shift. If you want another number, because this is my favorite one, Microsoft basically reported that Teams live captioning, so Micro Teams is their video conferencing and live captioning, the ability to see the text version of what someone is saying, usage went up 3,600%. So 3,600% since the start of the pandemic, because all these people were coming online and starting to use these different tools and technologies. And that's why accessibility is so important in the digital space, because just being in a space is not enough. I like to use the metaphor of, you think about Roe could, in theory, build a doctor, not really, but hypothetically, could build a doctor's office in every single corner in the United States. We could put a weight management specialist, an obesity specialist in every single corner in the United States. And that wouldn't work if every single office building had a 3-foot rock wall that you had to climb up to get to it. It's the idea that the space doesn't have to exist. It has to be something that everyone can get into. We have to make sure the door is open and can work for wherever someone is at in their day to day, in their mental health space, in their physical health space, especially in telemedicine, because you're not necessarily coming to us because you're feeling well, you're feeling great, you're ready to go. You're in a place where you may be struggling. It might have been very difficult. Healthcare can affect your body, your mind, your relationships. And so we want to create that comfortable, accessible space where people can come and not hit friction, just be able to meet the goals that they want.
I could really feel just how attached to the mission you were from some of our first conversations. The more and more I speak to you, the more I learn about Row, the more I learn about how impactful the product really is. And you guys have done some phenomenal things. I know one or two people in the business. So huge thumbs up.
Thank you.
Let let's go to like the overarching message of what is digital accessibility in your eyes? What is it?
Digital accessibility is making sure that stuff works for people the way that they need it to. That's not the most scientific definition, but that's the way that I think about it, is the fact that your things have to just work and make things easy for folks to be able to do whatever they need to do. I've always said, I come from more of a front end engineering, like user interface experience background with a lot of my design background. And so I've always thought that the best user interface is the one you don't really notice. Like, you just get the thing done. It's not like difficult. Something could be like beautiful and artistic, and I guess you could notice it in that way. But the most effective ones are the just, I need to do something, I get it done, and then it's over and I can move on to the next thing. And that's the best user experience. That's the best user interface, in my opinion, at least. And so digital accessibility is using the different web tools and technologies that are honestly built into the web. It isn't something that we have to like reinvent. This is something that is there. We just have to make sure we're using it appropriately so that folks can use whatever different technology that they have access to be able to get something done.
Yeah, break that down for
Yeah.
us. So there's tools, there's resources
Mhm.
online that we can use. What is a step process that we can take, or companies can take, individuals can take, to make digital accessibility more accessible,
Yeah.
if you like?
I mean, if you're on, like, let's just talk about building on the web. So if you're building on the web, you might be using like React or whatever framework, whatever, but you're using HTML. Like, at the core, you're using HTML, different elements. The first thing you could do is use semantic HTML. Use different elements by their names. So it's not like, here's a div with JavaScript on it that I'm making to make a click action. Use a button. And the reason you do that is because HTML, the different element types, they are specific technology. Different browsers or assistive technologies, such as voice over utility, which is the screen reader that's built, text to speech that's built into every single iOS product for years and years. If you're using the right markup, then voice over utility knows what the thing is, knows how to tell someone how to use it, how to get the different keyboard commands to work with that specific element. And it's not like it's anything you have to learn this whole new language or add this framework. It's built right into the bare bones of the internet and has been for years.
Okay. Interesting. So, really trying to think about our customer
Hmm.
or a user at a really holistic level or an
Yeah.
abstract level, completely away from some of what we're actually
Hmm.
coding or building together, and thinking, actually, how do we simplify these two things and just make it really easy for them to communicate?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. Is I started with the code, but accessibility really starts as soon as you're developing a product. Like as soon as you're ideating on a project, you want to understand what does someone need to be able to do, and how might that person be attempting to do that thing, and building it in from the ground up. So one very good thing to think about is when you're writing general user stories, like a user should be able to do XYZ. It's really important to frame them just from the outcomes you want the user to experience versus these specific things. So you don't say, I want the user to be able to click this button. You say, I want the user to be able to sign up. And having that more broad definition of success in terms of the outcome means that folks are thinking not just about, I want to go from point A to point B, but really the different multitude of flows that someone could take to get from point A to point B, and building that in from the ground up.
Has this idea completely changed your mindset in regards to software engineering and how you solve products? Because I can imagine that is quite an impactful way of
Mhm.
thinking. It's quite an impactful way of building. It has an impact on other people in your teams. Has it completely changed things for
I
you?
can answer that in two ways. In one way, it almost hasn't changed anything for me, but only because I learned about accessibility when I first really started working in engineering and in accessibility. I was self taught beforehand, so all of my code was just stuff I was doing on the fly. There's some embarrassing old table layout websites that I can point to from years past. But my very first job, my very first manager, Spell, he turned me into accessibility, like from the ground up. Before I even started, he sent me a book called Designing for Web Standards, I want to say, by Jeffrey Zeldman. And he sent it to me, and that book is a lot about building with progressive enhancement and building from the ground up, and a bit of this concept of accessibility, and learning, in a formal space as I'm a now quote unquote professional software engineer, or just a person who accidentally became an engineer trying to fake it until I make it. Accessibility was something that I learned very early on. And so when I worked with other engineers and moved to other organizations where it was something folks weren't familiar with, that's where it became like I had to help shift their mindsets and demonstrate the value of not even like building these features, because it isn't necessarily extra work unless you're not thinking about it. So bringing some of those thought processes to others. But it's fun because then you get to help more people learn. Spell taught me a lot of stuff. I've taught people who I've worked with and have reported me stuff. And then now they're building accessibly at other organizations. So it's this cool sort of like tree of knowledge that seems more heady than it is, than that spreads out.
Uh, are these new concepts for people as well? New team, are these new concepts that you introduce to the way in which you build software for people?
I think so. I think for some folks, it's something that they didn't necessarily think of or were aware of. And I found that both with engineers and with other sort of cross-functional stakeholders. One, since I worked previously in media at BuzzFeed, we did a lot of work actually with the editorial team around alternate text. So the idea that for every image, you can add a property that specifies a text description of that image that can provide context both for someone using assistive technology and also just if the image doesn't load. It has a lot of benefits besides just that assistive or accessible aspect of it. But our teams hadn't really been thinking about that, and at first, we thought there was going to be a lot of pushback to, oh, this is just another thing to do. It's more work. But we presented it not just as here's the thing you have to do to check the box to say it's accessible. It's part of the storytelling process. Anytime you put an image in content, you're doing it for a reason. And it helps you think of what's that reason and how do I create that text version of the story that's trying to be told with that image.
Okay. Do you think the use of generative AI,
Ooh.
LLMs, ChatGPT as an example, will change the game of accessibility? We haven't discussed this, so this is on the
No, I
fly,
dig it.
but
Let's do it.
you know, it's just got my thoughts ticking in regards to, okay, it is a thought shift, but we've got another big medium
Hmm.
shift that's come now. Is that going to change the game even more?
That there are two places where I've like played with generative AI, like Chat GPT a little bit with accessibility, with I think mixed results. So one positive place is just in general, it's very easy to spit out basic markup with Chat GPT. I found a lot of like, hey, how do I write this form in React? ChatGPT knows a lot about the different assistive attributes accessible. Like ChatGPT writes pretty good code because, in theory, it's pulling from good examples of code that meets standards on the web. So it's nice to see that you don't necessarily say, "Write me an accessible button." You can just say, "Write me a form," and it comes out. ChatGPT can also pull and look for, "Hey, I need help with this specific accessible aspect of some, like carousels or more interactive features." And it can give pretty good advice. So that's helpful for folks who may not necessarily have a direct resource or expert in their organization or are looking for a second opinion. ChatGPT does all right there. The place where we've seen more mixed results is when it comes to generative AI and just generating alt text for images, which I know a lot of companies use because it, in theory, can save time, same thought. And that has a very much hit or miss aspect because AI doesn't know the story you're necessarily trying to tell. In addition to the fact sometimes it just describes the image incorrectly. We found some hilariously bad descriptions of images when we were trying testing generative AI for BuzzFeed News image content. It was just like very much missing the point to the point it was like slightly offensive. So
Really?
yeah,
Yeah, maybe let's not.
yeah. Well, we can't go
Maybe
into
that's not.
detail, but we'll just say we determined that it was better to have editors write their own content than rely on auto generated.
Yeah, I bet. So I'm a new
Hmm.
leader coming into a new team. I want to introduce a better idea on how we think about digital accessibility. What are three things that you would really encourage new leaders trying to coach this mindset to take to their teams and approach this in building software?
Oh, that is a good one. I think the first is showing I don't know if I'll be able to get to three, but the one that I know is most important is showing the impact of the lack of accessible attributes on actual users. Because you like I can throw stats all day at 25% of folks in the United States have some form of disability. I think it's 12.8% use some sort of 12.4% of adults have a visual impairment and use assistive or adaptive apps. But those numbers don't necessarily resonate with a lot of folks. Like everything is big numbers, like, oh, 12.4%. That seems like 88% aren't. Maybe that's good enough. I like to have folks see other people going through their experiences who are using some sort of assistive adaptive technology and see the struggle and see where things go wrong. And I've used that in the past working with either acquaintances with disabilities or in some cases third parties who do accessibility testing and have folks with disabilities on staff to be able to, hey, go through our website, show where the struggle is, like show how bad it looks or how bad it reads or how bad it sounds. And that has resonated so much more strongly with folks who are building. It's sometimes resonates also with folks on more of the business side as well. And there I can go through some other arguments from more of the business side, but when it comes to the builders, folks want to take pride into their work and the things that they do. And watching someone fail while using it is sort of the easiest way to say, hey, here's where the opportunity is.
Okay, that's a really good point. That will probably show someone just how impactful it is watching someone struggle to actually use something that they've built. Engineers are proud by nature as well, and they want to see their products be impactful and people have really good customer experiences. So if they don't, it goes to show that something does need to change or something does need to give. I really like that example. Have you got a couple of examples, if you're allowed to share, with what you've built at Row, as in terms of where you've actually been able to introduce digital accessibility?
What's nice, I can't go into too many specifics, but I will say what's nice about Row is I've joined other organizations where accessibility was a bit of a fight. Like
Right.
The technology wasn't being used already, and it wasn't a consideration, and folks weren't built in, and we said like, hey, we want to adjust things about how this works, and they're like, it doesn't matter, it's not important. Because
Yeah.
accessibility, like just healthcare accessibility, is a general tenet of Roe, and the fact that they, when I came to Row, they were already building using accessibility considerations and best practices, that like skipped 3 years of work ahead on what would need to be done to build that culture. And so at Row, it's really more on the maintenance mode of accessibility, of understanding that it's already something we're talking about. Our design system already has the colors built in to be accessible. Do we get it perfect 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But we treat accessibility issues as bugs because they are bugs. It's not like, oh, it's this weird compliance thing that will backburner with everything else. It is a functionality bug that is preventing someone from accessing healthcare, and that's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good thought process. And I think like you said, it's a cultural thing. Um, it would be really good to understand before we wrap this up. The world's moving quite a lot. The world is changing quite a lot. I think the software engineering space has changed quite a lot, especially in the last 10 years. It would be good to understand from you as an engineering leader what you think the top three characteristics are for a software engineer in today's landscape and climate, what you need to be really successful in your role.
Okay, that's a good one. I think first is
First, accessibility. Is that what you're going
this
to
is
say?
a well, now I am.
Yeah.
I think first is really with like ChatGPT and the idea that like writing syntax is still a skill at a certain level, but there's a lot that you can get out of the box just by asking like, get me this code, and you get something that's like pretty good. So I think the first skill is really understanding problem spaces, because a lot of good engineering is not just like, here's the code and I slam it down and it works. It's understanding how all the pieces fit together, how all the systems fit together, and really understanding the problems. So the idea of a technologically skilled but very product minded engineer are the folks that I've seen be the most successful, because they're not just thinking about here's how these pieces connect, but here's how we make sure they connect in a way that really works for other people, which there is an accessibility aspect there, but then there's just a general building good products there. So I'd
Okay.
say that's one.
That's a good answer.
I would say two is definitely, because everything changes so fast, there's so much technology. I think someone who is okay not knowing everything and having a bit of that low ego, you can drive yourself absolutely mad in the industry trying to keep up with, there's this chat GPT and now there's Claude and now there's Dennis and there's like four others that keep coming into the industry, and it can become incredibly overwhelming, and you feel the sense of, what do I do as an engineer if all of the computers are doing everything for us? But it's really being able to filter that signal to noise ratio and assess where we can use something as a tool, and where maybe something isn't ready yet, or where it really just needs a human processing the information in a more empathetic way than you could see with a robot.
Okay, nice. So strong bias to solving problems, low ego, and it's okay to not know
Yeah,
everything. Focus on what you think is important to know. There's too much in the technology sphere to really know everything in
yeah.
depth. When you come across something, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah, and I would say the third thing is probably a sense of mentorship. Mentorship has always been something that's incredibly important to me, coming from like literally no computer science background, self-taught with everything. I relied so much on mentors in my early career, and learning from other people, especially in an age where it's like, oh, you can just look it up and find it up. Having that person who can walk you through and work with your learning style and really bring you along for the ride is so invaluable. And so when you're early in your career, it's someone who is ready to be mentored, like okay to ask questions, okay to admit what they don't know, and then work with others and listen and take that feedback. And when you're later in your career, it's being able to help others see where they have opportunities for improvement and be able to say, hey, like, let's work on this together. Well, being a jerk about it. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that one's quite lost on a lot of people. I think it is lost on a lot of people. We're busy by nature, and I think a lot of people forget that a bit of guidance and direction will really help them. especially spotting pitfalls in people, whether it's, a characteristic trait or something that's quite literal in terms of what they're doing. Um, it's an eye-opening experience. I
Yeah.
agree. Mentorship's
I've
key.
I've seen that manifest in two weird ways. One is in current market environment where it's definitely sensitive. There's been more layoffs. Some people are almost hesitant to provide criticism to others because they don't want to be seen as critical and they don't want their they don't want their coworkers to get in trouble if there's a lot of issues. The other weird
Okay.
thing I've seen is a lot of junior folks will be like, to your point on people are really busy. Be like, oh, I really want to ask this person, but they're so busy. I don't want to bother them. I don't want to bother them. And then I talk to more senior engineers, and all they say is, "Oh, I wish I could I want opportunities for mentorship. I want to help other people grow." And it's like I look at two people standing across the room, like, "Can y'all just talk to one another?"
Yes.
Because it's all there. All the pieces are there.
Yeah, love that. I love that. I love asking that question as well because I learn every single time from how different people think about what are key characteristics, and it's changing quite a lot. That the space is changing and characteristics need to change with that as well. The emergence of new technology, you do need to embrace it in a different way and think about it in a different way as well. um, we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, sure thing.
Plum, absolutely excellent podcast on digital accessibility, just how succinct, direct, how critical it is as well. It's massively important that I think people think about this, and you've given us some really good ways to actually introduce this into a business, how it's a cultural thing, but how you can actually go and approach it. Um, so a big thank you, a huge
Yeah,
thank
of
you.
course.
And
Thanks for letting me step on my soapbox. I'm always happy to do so.
no. um, I hope that people can actually have some tangible takeaways from this. I know that they will be able to. For people listening, likes, shares, reposts, subscribership, and promoting this is what makes the community go round. So please do that. Lots of people listen, hundreds, thousands of people listen. So come and tune in and then take this back to your current companies and embrace it and promote it within. And like I said, a huge thank you, Plum, and all the best
Yeah,
to
of
you.
course. Thanks to you. Thanks to all the listeners who are going to go do something accessible today.
Love it. Thanks a lot.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.